The main thing I've been shooting is, like I said, landscape astrophotography, especially Milky Way is one of my main passions, photographing our galaxy. Okay, so if everyone is ready, I'm gonna get started with the presentation. I want to cover a lot of things, so I don't want to be late. There are a few slides, and I want to get through everything that I prepared for this presentation. First of all, I want to say thank you first to Gary because she introduced me to Novak and the club. She was with me in one of our workshops last year. She talked very highly about Novak, and she introduced me to everything you do. And thinking about the idea of giving a talk. So I'm really honored to be talking today for Novak. And thanks also to Paul for coordinating the tech check and the interaction and everything. Today I want to speak about wide field astrophotography, more specifically landscape astrophotography is the main thing I do. I'll be showing you the different techniques, gear, everything that I do. But yeah, as an index, I'll be talking about the main things that I consider critical when you are doing any wide field astro, mainly the planning and the tools that I use for my plan, like apps, websites, techniques and tips, camera gear, all the camera gear that I use and I recommend, wide field techniques, like single shots, stacking, tracking, more, and also some editing and post-processing, which can take for another entire presentation. But I'll give you a few ideas of the things that I do in my images. As a short and brief introduction, like Paul said, my name is Zafra. I'm originally from Spain, where I'm at the moment, preparing for the total solar eclipse that we have next month here. But yeah, normally I'm based in Las Vegas in the US. I've been living there for the last 3 years. Used to live on the East Coast out of Philadelphia many years ago. And I've been photographing the night sky for some time now. I started about 10 years ago. And that's when I became hooked, like photographing the stars, the Milky Way. That's how everything got started. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm a professional astrophotographer. I do this for a living, running workshops, teaching courses, presentations, and different things. My real passion is sharing. I started sharing my love for the night sky and for the landscapes. And that's what I do through my website, which is called Capture the Atlas. I do this in the field, normally through workshops and tours, and also online with different Milky Way courses, and also with some inspiration. I have a ton of like free articles on our website teaching everything about wide field, star tracking, panoramas, Milky Way, you name it. And also we run a year contest called the Milky Way Photographer of the Year, where we kind of feature the best images of the year and then try to inspire people to the world to go out and photograph the night sky. And for me, like I said, everything started about 10 years ago. Of course, we had very, bad equipment compared to now. Modern cameras, modern lenses are more advanced. But still, that's not an excuse to say that I was pretty terrible. I had no idea what I was doing, but I remember looking at back on my camera, seeing the Milky Way there, and being just completely amazed. I started taking my first astro images in southern Spain and Europe. That's where I was living back then. Like I said, terrible images, but I already got the astro back, and I started trying to get better. That's when I got my first full frame camera. It was a Nikon D800, also about 10 years ago. Suddenly the night became like day. I started seeing much more detail, better landscapes, and everything came together. That's when I really got into more astro and more wide field. I was a passionate traveler and landscape photographer for a long time. But when I got the better equipment and the better knowledge is when I really got into astro. The main thing I've been shooting is, like I said, landscape astrophotography, especially Milky Way is one of my main passions, photographing our galaxy. And that's what I've been doing, especially over the last 9-10 years. And today I will show you a bunch of different Milky Way images all over the world. Apart from Milky Way, I also do other stuff. I like photographing the northern lights. It's one of my other passions. Every year I travel 1 or 2 trips to the Arctic to photograph the aurora. It can be in Iceland, Norway, Finland, Fairbanks in Alaska. And it's just, like a very different type of images. It's very exciting because every time you go is different. And I've been doing this, like I said, in many different Arctic regions over the years. Even in California, where we've been lucky with the recent solar maximum, we're lucky to have auroras very down south. Even I think a couple of weeks ago, there were some displays in Northern California. And it's very exciting times for shooting aurora. Also, I've been photographing meteor showers, comets, lunar eclipses and solar eclipses and different stuff. But like I said, the main thing that I love doing is especially Milky Way. And more recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been more Milky Way panoramas. I used to live in Philadelphia, like I said, where there were very light polluted skies. So it was a bit difficult to do astro, except for a few regions like the Outer Banks, Acadia, or some areas in Upper State New York. But in California, where I moved later, I lived there for a couple of years. The night sky was incredible, and I was going a lot to shoot beautiful landscapes with the Milky Way. And then to the Southwest. That's where I'm currently living. Like I said, I'm based in Las Vegas, which is one of the most light polluted places in the world. But thankfully, Las Vegas is surrounded by a lot of national parks and beautiful dark locations. So you do drive 2, 3, 4 hours around, you can have incredible landscapes and night skies. And also, I'm very passionate about deserts. I'm original from Spain, where we have like a very arid and deserty landscape. And I'm always drawn to this kind of beautiful desert landscapes where everything's kind of like quiet and you can get the stars with nice formations, geology, and all that, especially all the area around Utah, Arizona, California. It's just incredible for astro. And if you've been there, which I'm sure many of you have been there, you know how amazing it is. Death Valley, I call Death Valley my backyard. It's like a couple of hours from my home. And that's where I do most of my astro imaging. And more recently, especially in the last, I would say 3, 4 years, I've been traveling long periods in the Southern Hemisphere. I was really attracted by shooting the Milky Way in the other hemisphere with all the other constellations and the stars that you cannot really see here. And my first trip was to the Peruvian Andes in Peru. And that changed everything. I think it's, even today, I think it's still the best and most incredible night sky I've seen in my life. You are basically at 16,000 feet, surrounded by these 21,000 feet mountains with glaciers. The sky is super, super dark. It's a 3-dimensional, and there are definitely no words to describe it. Also, the landscapes are beautiful mountains, lakes, and it's difficult to put into words. So I've been taking different photo treks in the Andes. It's very difficult to reach these locations. Normally, you have to do like multi-day hikes. So we have like an entire equipment and people helping out with mules and other stuff. But you have the opportunity to photograph the night sky in very original locations where the night sky feels just incredible. Apart from Peru, I've been to other high altitude regions like in Bolivia. In Bolivia, there are different parts which are very unknown and very under the radar of astrophotographers. But still, they are incredible. We have kind of similar conditions with very high altitude mountains and incredible night skies like this one here. Or even in Uyuni, this is the largest salt flats in the world. And like I said, I've been doing a lot of Milky Way and astro panoramas lately. I'll explain later how I do them. But yes, Atacama is another of the most renowned astro destinations in the world. You have a lot of, probably some of the most important telescopes in the world, like ALMA, Cerro Tololo, Las Campanas. There are probably more than 10, 15 incredible observatories. And also any place for astro is just awesome. You have beautiful landscapes, beautiful night skies, and it's one of the most incredible places for astro. More recently, in the last couple of years, I've been more drawn to the South Pacific. So I've been photographing the Milky Way in more rare locations like Fiji or Tonga or Australia, where I've been there a couple of times in the last 2 years, where also the night skies and the landscapes are very unique. And one of my favorite places where I've been doing white field astro is New Zealand. It's one of those places that is difficult again to put into words how special and incredible it is, especially with those beautiful landscapes. You have these glaciated peaks, turquoise lakes, beaches, forests. I think the diversity of New Zealand for astro landscapes is one of the best places in the world. More recently, I was last month in Namibia, and it was an incredible place, but I haven't edited any image yet. It was a very intense trip, so I'm still working on the images. But like I said, all these locations are incredible. And one of the most things that I am attracted by landscape astro is that every landscape is different. And I love doing and shooting deep sky images. I know a lot of you are deep sky astrophotographers. But for me personally, when I'm doing my astro images, when you kind of incorporate the landscape, you're adding something more unique. You have something very special that happens in that specific place. And that ties the passion for traveling, scouting, exploring with a passion for astrophotography. Yeah, all these are from New Zealand. And now getting into how I get my images, I want to explain you briefly how I capture everything from the planning to the gear to the techniques. Getting into the planning, I think is one of the most critical parts when you are doing white field astro. And for planning, I have 4 different tools or checks that I do for planning my images. The first, I usually have a Milky Way calendar created for my location. I started doing these calendars about 7, 8 years ago. And it was mainly for myself because I wanted to have like a chart with the best days to shoot the Milky Way. And then they became more popular. Some of my friends and people were asking like, oh, can you create a calendar for my location? And I started doing calendars for more and more regions. And people found it helpful. So we started creating about 20 calendars every year for different latitudes, covering basically like anywhere on Earth. And I can also create calendars for more specific places. The good thing about these calendars is that I can check very quickly the best days of the year to shoot the Milky Way. So I have like a table with the moon set, a moonrise, the sun, and then the Milky Way times, and also the Milky Way position. And then I mark in different colors which are the best days to shoot the Milky Way. So in pink or red, I mark best days, and then in blue, days which are okay. You can shoot the Milky Way for a few hours. And then in dark blue, I mark the days when the moon is too bright to do any astro. So as you can see, this is, for example, for this year, we're in July now. July 11th and the days before and after are very good days for Milky Way. And I can see the best days at a glance. I was talking to Paul before the presentation the other day about where do the people in the club usually go for astro. And he mentioned the Sky Meadows State Park, which you were talking before. And I've created a calendar for the Sky Meadows for this year. So I'm gonna send this over to Paul and hopefully he can share this with the group. Somehow, I know we're still in July, but still there are a few months, great months for astro, like all July, August, September, October are months where you can photograph the Milky Way. So I hope that Paul can share this with the group and maybe you can use this as a reference. And also, you will want to download any Milky Way calendar for any other region or in the future. You can just Google capture the Atlas Milky Way calendar, and you can download them for free. The other tool that I use are, of course, light pollution maps. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with how light pollution maps work. But something I find very useful applied for landscape astro is especially how you position yourself in the map. One very common mistake is that people look at the light pollution map. They say, okay, Las Vegas is here. There's a ton of light pollution. But if I move like an hour away to this spot, it's not going to affect me. Well, it depends on where you're shooting. If you are doing landscape astro, white field astro, you're getting a big portion of the sky in your images. And even if you are like 2 hours from a big source of light pollution, you can still have some light pollution in your images. So one little tip that I can recommend when you are doing like Milky Way stuff is getting this application. This is for iPhone. I am pretty sure it's also for Android. and it's called light pollution map. So you go to the App Store, just type light pollution map and download this application. It looks like a normal light pollution map app, but there is something that I love, and it's like a new inclusion in the app. And it's this kind of all sky pool that you can see on the right side. If you click that button, you'll see like a live preview of how the light pollution is looking in the sky. So you'll have first like a spherical picture of the night sky. As you can see, all the blue is dark sky, and then everything that is kind of like more green, yellow, red, even purple is going to be the areas where there is more light pollution. So here you can see from my location in Badwater Basin in Death Valley, if you look to the south, you're going to see some light pollution in the sky. Now, the amazing thing about this app is that if you change from fisheye, which is this view, you click on panoramic, which is on the right side, you can actually see a panoramic view of a landscape with the light pollution. So these are actually the mountains in the location where I click on the map. This is Badwater Basin, which is the lowest part in North America, where the sky is a border too. It's a pretty dark sky, but still we have sunlight pollution in the south from Vegas. So I want you to compare here the image. This is, like I said, Badwater, and here you can see in the area around the middle where I am here shooting the lunar eclipse, you can see the light pollution. And this is really helpful whenever you're going to a new location that you don't know and you want to see how light pollution is going to be in your images. Using this app with this little tool is going to give you a nice preview of the light pollution in that spot. Also, I use a ton of Google Earth Pro. Again, especially if I'm new to that location, I've never been there. I like using Google Earth because that can give you a very nice preview of the landscape. So especially for the scouting like landscape features or how's the landscape in the areas, I like using Google Earth. Also, there's like a 3D view. So if you go all the way down on the map to Google Earth, it'll give you like a kind of like a street view on Google Maps where you can see the actual landscape feature or geological features in the image. Here, for example, I have the Turret Arch. This is in Arches National Park in Utah. And there's also a function where you can see how the Milky Way is going to look in the sky for that specific location. So for example, here I can see where the Milky Way is going to be placed. And I was, for example, planning this composition where I would have the Milky Way core right in the middle of the arch. Keep in mind that this tool is not 100% accurate. For some reason, during some periods of the year, some months, the alignment doesn't work correctly. But for others, it works well, like this one here. This is the final image that I planned. And just in general, if you just want to scout location, have an idea of the landscapes or where you can find her, I think this application, Google Earth Pro, is free. It's a great tool to plan all your images. Also, photo pills. You can also use another app like Planet Pro, which is similar. But the great thing about photo pills is that you can use this in the field when you are actually in the landscape for planning your compositions for the night. So when I'm in the field, most people are just taking pictures with the phone, blah, blah, blah. I'm always scouting with my phone and using photo pills. This is called the AR mode or the augmented reality mode. And basically you can just put that in your phone, see live how the Milky Way is going to look in the sky at any time. I know other apps like Arium and other Astro Classic apps are incorporating this kind of like AR mode. Originally, it was mainly PhotoPills and Planet Pro, and still PhotoPills I think is the more intuitive, it's easier, and it's the one I've been using for many years. This is an example from the Liquid Arch in Utah, where you can see the alignment in the field, and then the actual image that I took later. So yeah, that's the planning, and it's the first part. Like I said, it's always critical that you make the right planning when you want to shoot your Milky Way or your wide field images. Getting into camera gear, which is also one of the most frequent questions, which camera you should use for Astro. For Milky Way, for cameras, our recommendation is a full-frame camera. You can perfectly shoot Milky Way and wide field images with a crop sensor camera, even with a micro four thirds. But in my experience with my cameras and teaching workshops, full frame cameras give you the best low light performance, especially more modern mirrorless cameras. They have a great low light performance, and they have some great features that other older cameras are missing, like focus peaking. Some cameras like Nikon and Sony has this kind of like live view monitoring where you can see like an image at night carefully brightened. In Sony it's called bright monitoring. In Nikon it's called a starlight view, which basically pressing a button, all the screen, which is completely black, is gonna come like daytime. And that's magic, especially when you are doing any compositions and you want to compose. I remember back in the day, we used to do like this kind of like high ISO test shots, and it was like, okay, take one image, and I had to recompose, tilt down, move up. Now I can do everything live. Pressing this button with these cameras, I can just see the landscape carefully during the night. So cameras, my recommendation, if you can, full frame camera. For lenses are as equally important as cameras. Make sure you have a fast wide angle lens. By wide, I mean something between 14 and 35. You can still do wide field astro with a longer focal length, like 50, 85, even 135, and incorporate parts of the landscapes. But my goal when I'm doing wide field astro is to show a big part of the sky, a big part of the landscape, usually panoramas. And for that, I think the ideal lenses are wide angle, and ideally they are fast. By fast, I mean f2.8 or faster. All the lenses I use for my images are f1.8 or f1.4, because that makes a huge difference when you're shooting. Tripod, this is one of the main weak parts that I see in many people. They have an amazing camera, an amazing lens, but then they have like a flimsy, cheap tripod. And when you start using the star trackers and other things, having a sturdy tripod that you can rely, I think is fundamental. So make sure you have a very good tripod when you are taking your astro images. And others, of course, like remote shutters, headlamps, flashlights. I'm not gonna mention this because I'm sure you already know them. Something that I highly recommend if you are passionate about doing, all these wide field astro is having an astro modified camera. There are different type of modifications like hydrogen alpha, full spectrum. In my experience, for wide field imaging, I think an H alpha modification is probably the best. It's very simple, very easy. It's just like a plug and play camera. Full spectrum can of course work. So you have a full spectrum camera, you can perfectly shoot wide field. It's just maybe more complicated with filters, with some things to consider, with color corrections. But H alpha modifications are very simple. And they will, of course, allow you to capture more detail in the H alpha regions and also more light. So here in this example, you can see on the left is a Sony A1 camera. And on the right side, you can see a Sony A7 III Astro Modified. So it's the same location, same lens, same composition. It's basically just different cameras. And the editing is very simple. I just did like a normal color correction and very simple stretching. And you can see how the image on the right has much more detail in all those H alpha neighborhoods. And of course, star trackers. When you are doing wide field imaging, by using a star tracker, you can shoot longer exposures, sometimes 1 minute, 2 minutes, even 3 minutes with no problem. And that will allow you to capture more light. That's critical because you'll be able to capture longer exposures. And by doing that, you can close your aperture a little bit to get better optical quality. You can also lower your ISO to have better dynamic range. And I think a star tracker is a key piece of equipment if you are doing any astro. In my case, I use the Vendor Polaris. This tracker came to the market about 4 years ago. And I got it because I was curious about all the automations that the tracker was doing. Basically, you can do any polar alignment in any place in the world, even if you don't see polarities in the northern hemisphere, you can align with any star. And also you can do automations. That's the main reason why I got this tracker. It's designed to do fully automations. So I can, if I'm doing, for example, a huge Milky Way panorama, I can tell the tracker, start here, finish there, and the tracker does everything automatically. I'll show you later how I use it for my panoramas, but just the idea is, of course, tracking like any other star tracker, but also having these automations. I've been using also a lot of other star trackers. For wide field landscape astro, I recommend some trackers like the MSM or Motion Move Nomad. It's like a very light portable tracker that many people use, or the Skywatcher Star Venturer, or the Iotron Skyguider Pro. And there are newer trackers coming to the market. Um, Regardless of the tracker, the important thing is that you can capture longer exposures. It's not always possible. There are some situations where you can use a tracker or it's not recommended to use a tracker. But in general, if you can, I highly recommend using a tracker. And also for wide field astro, filters is another common question if I use any filter. And over the years, I was using different filters, mainly star glow filters and light pollution filters. I was using them separately, but I didn't like them because sometimes the star glow was too strong or the light pollution was removing a lot of light. So last year, I had this idea of building my own filter. I got in touch with some Japanese optical manufacturers who were already designing filters. And I proposed them an idea, which was to build and create like an all-in-one solution for wide field astro. So we created this filter, which we call Capture the Night, which is basically like an all-in-one filter where you can achieve three effects. One is the smart star glow, so you can have a glow, beautiful glow in the stars, but without blurring the background. And that's one of the main problems with other filters. They blur completely on the background. Then you can have a light pollution reduction, which of course, they don't make magic. You're in a Bortle 8, Bortle 9 sky with a lot of light pollution. There is no filter that is going to make magic, but still, they can add more contrast to your images and they can make a difference. So that's the other effect. And the third one is a small boost in the H-alpha nebula. This is a broadband filter. It's not a narrow band. So you cannot expect to see this kind of red, super red nebula. But still, I think it's a great idea to have these filters and to achieve this one effect. This is an example where you can see the Milky Way sky with no filters at all. So this is the normal image with a star tracker. And then I'm going to show you the example with a filter. So it's exactly the same image and both are raw point. So this is with the filter and without the filter. As you can see, take a look at the stars, how the stars become more prominent, the colors, the contrast in the sky, the H-alpha nebula like Zophyuki, which is in the sky there. You can see how it gets more prominent. It just creates some more atmospheric astro images. I don't recommend this maybe for deep sky because the techniques for editing and processes maybe are more complicated. I've used this up to 200 millimeters and it can work, but still, I think the filter is especially designed for wide field astrophotography. If you want to get a filter or take a look at more information, how it works, examples, raw files, you can scan this QR code with your phone and you can check more information or just Google Capture the Night Astro Filter and you will find the website with all the details about the filter. We're currently out of stock, but the next batch is gonna come out this year. So you can already pre-order one of the next batch. And now I want to show you some wide field techniques and some of the main techniques that I use in the field when I'm shooting. And I'm gonna start with the most simple, which is taking single shots. Single shots are, of course, the best for beginners. So you are taking your first Milky Way images. That's the thing I recommend. Forget about star tracking, forget about astro-modified cameras, just get single shots because that's the best way to get started. And also it's the best for some situations where you have to be quick or there are moving subjects. Sometimes maybe we're in a rush or there's something moving in the sky. We have to be quick. And in those situations, doing single shots is still the best way to do it. This is an example of a single shot. And it's just to show you that even with a simple camera lens, this is about 10, 12-second exposure, you're going to still get a nice and decent image. Of course, it's not the same quality as if you are tracking, but for a lot of people, it's probably good enough. And if you don't want to be overcomplicating things, this is probably the best way to go. Also, I was mentioning if they are moving subjects, which is what happened this night in Tonga, we had these palm trees and this tropical breeze, which was moving all the palm trees. So of course, there was no tracking, no stacking, that was out of the question. And what I did was taking just one single shot. And this is also to show you, this is a Bordeaux one, it's a very dark sky, but this is a 13-second exposure, 13 seconds. And only in that time frame, look at the sky, look at the colors, and how much detail and color you can get in the sky in one single exposure. This photo is super, super simple. It's just pointing at the sky, include some foreground, and then take a single shot. So like I said, if you are either starting out or if you want to make things easier, doing single shots is one of the best ways and the best techniques to do it. The other one is stacking. Yeah, the other one is stacking, and it's another one of the most common techniques, not only for white field, but if you are doing deep sky, stacking is one of the main things you do, and it's basically the same rule. So we basically stack images to reduce the noise and improve the signal to noise ratio in our images. So the technique is very simple as well. We take a series of images of the same composition, normally 5 to 10 shots, and then we stack them together using a special software for that. You can use Photoshop, but it's a bit of a nightmare. So I recommend using, if you're using Matte, I recommend a Starry Landscape Stacker. Or if you use Sequator, if you use Windows, I recommend Sequator, which is free and works really well. So depending on your software and your computer, any of these two softwares are gonna work well. And just to show you an example, this is Mobius Arch in the Alabama Hills in California. And the technique, like I said, is very simple. You first take your of course, you compose, you make sure everything is correct. And then you take one single shot, which is gonna be like here, 13 seconds, f1.8, ISO 16/100. And then you take, like I said, 5 to 10 images. In this take, I think I took like 10 or 12 images, and then you stack them together. There's no point in stacking more images. I know there is for deep sky, the more the better normally, but for white field, I've been running a lot of tests, and usually 5 to 10, I think is the best sweet spot. Another common question, in case you want to ask later, I want to do it now. I don't usually shoot dark frames or flat frames, or basically any calibration frames for my wide field imaging. I know they are critical for deep sky, and it's something you really have to do. But again, I've been running many, many tests, and for wide field astrophotography, this can be like a small benefit. But in my opinion, all the work that goes into calibration frames, taking the darks and putting them together and doing all the calibrations, I think it's not worth the benefit that you can get. That doesn't mean that there's no benefit. Of course, there's some benefit, but it's so minimal when you are doing these huge landscapes with the night sky that I prefer not to take any calibration frames. So for the stacking, like I said, you take all these images. This is an example of before and after. It's the same region in the Milky Way core. And look at the image on the left and the image on the right, so you can see the difference. And then we just do our final, once we stack all the images, we do the final edit in the shot. There are other situations where I stack images, and that's when I cannot track. This is one example taken last year in Peru. And this is probably the highest altitude where I've ever photographed the Milky Way. This was at around 17,000 feet or 18,000 feet, something like that. It was one of the highest mountains in Peru. And I was in this mountaintop where it was extremely windy. Like the wind was blowing everything. I had to even hold the tripod with my hands and just press the button, blocking the wind with my body. It was one of the most treacherous nights for shooting astro in my life. It was very hard. And of course, there was no way I could set up my star tracker. So what I did instead for taking this panorama was stacking images. I was using my body to cover the camera and protect the camera from the wind on the tripod. And then in the first panel, I was taking 5 images, about 10 seconds each. Then moving to the next frame, I was taking another 5, another 5, another 5, all the way to the end. And even though I wasn't tracking, you can get to see in this image the amount of detail and color that I got, even without using a tracker, just stacking. Of course, the night sky makes a bit difference. This is a very dark sky, high altitude and all that. But this is just to give you an idea that stacking images, you can still get a lot of quality, and it's also fairly simple. And then blendings. Blendings is another critical step when you are doing white astro, especially when you're doing tracking. At the same moment that you are using a star tracker, keep in mind that you will have to do blendings. Because of course, when you are tracking, the sky is gonna be beautiful with a lot of detail, but all the foreground will be blurred. So you always have to do a blending between the sky and the foreground. There are many types of blendings like long exposures, blue hours, stacked images, and all that. And by blending images, we can reduce the noise, get better details, get better focus, and more effects. And again, it's a crucial technique to get the best possible quality. One of them is the long exposure blending when you are tracking, and this is the most common shooting scenario that I have in the field. This is the example from Delicate Arch that I showed before, and this is actually the images I took. So on the left side, you can see the image, and on the right side is exactly the same location, same composition. I didn't move my tripod, and same settings. It's about 120 seconds, f2, and ISO 800. The only difference on the left side, the tracker is on, and on the right side, the tracker is off. And you can see this on the trailing on the stars. On the right side, there's a lot of trailing. On the left side, the stars are pinpoint of detail. If I get my foreground image with the star trailing and I raise the exposure, you can see the image. It looks almost like daytime. So there's a lot of fine detail and quality. If I'm taking a 10, 12-second exposure, like the one I showed before, you're gonna have a lot of noise. And I know that the noise reduction go much better with software, but still, you're gonna have this kind of like waxy look, which was a little bit cartoony, and I prefer to have more natural detail in my images. So I get my foreground, then I do my blending, creating a mask between the sky and the foreground. Then I have my images. For the foreground, of course, you need to adjust the brightness and colors to match the sky, because sometimes they're gonna look different. And then you have your final image after the blending. So again, this is one of the most common techniques that you will find if you are doing white astro. The other one is focus stacking. I don't do this all the time. It's just in very specific situations, and it's mainly when you are shooting very close to your foreground. Getting close to the foreground can be beneficial. Sometimes you can create more dramatic perspectives in your images, especially when there are elements like trees, like something in the foreground, like patterns or flowers, anything that can create more perspective. Is going to be beneficial when you get closer and you want to capture the landscape. The main problem is that when we are shooting at night, we shoot with very wide apertures, even if it's like 1.8, 2.8, even f4. The depth of field is very shallow, which means that when you're focusing on the stars or even in the landscape, your first program can be out of focus. If you're, of course, far enough, you can just take one shot for your foreground, like this one here in Delicate Arch. It's far enough that with one shot for the foreground, everything is gonna be in focus. However, in other situations like this one I'm gonna show you, is not enough. In this one, I shoot the sky, as you can see here. So I do my image for the sky with my normal sky settings. Then for the foreground, I have this juniper tree that I wanted to put in my first foreground. So on the left side, I'm focusing in my landscape, So using especially the monuments in the back, this is in Valley of the Gods in Utah. So I'm focusing on the monuments and general landscape. As you can see, everything looks pretty sharp on the left image, but the juniper tree in the first foreground is completely out of focus. So what I did is basically taking the image on the left, then change my focus and focus on the juniper tree on the right. And by doing that, now I have my two images with different focal points. Then what I do is blending them. I'm blending with my previous sky image. And that's when I get my final image, which is completely in focus with all the details and all the colors. Another technique, panoramas. This is the main thing I do. And of course, you can usually combine this with the other techniques. You can combine panoramas with blendings, with focus stacking. You can complicate things as much as you want when you are talking about this. But basically, panoramas is one of the main things that I love doing. And I normally use a dual setup. Thanks to the ventral polarities that I talked before, I can automate the panorama for the sky. So I can tell start here, finish there with this stacking and with this interval. And my sky is shooting automatically. I normally shoot my panoramas with a 20 mil f1.8. And then side by side, I have my other camera, which is another non-modified camera for my foreground. And that's usually with a wider lens, so I can shoot with a 14 mil, so I can cover more side of the foreground, and I can shoot back to back. So normally when I get to the field, I program my tracker, I set up my ventral polarities to do the sky automatically. In the meantime, I'm shooting my foreground. That allows me to capture things back to back simultaneously and do images that otherwise would be impossible, like this huge double Milky Way arch panorama that I captured this year in Death Valley. For this one, I took it last March. My Polaris was shooting the night sky, and simultaneously I was shooting the reflection. So in this situation, if you want to do things with only one camera and one tracker, it will be very, very challenging. And thanks to this, I can be more efficient in the field. I have more time for composting and to dedicate for my images. So this is an example of the panorama for the sky, 60 seconds, f2.2, ISO 1250. And I always recommend overlapping 40 to 50% in your sky images. So as you can see here, with a 20 mil, I know that in 9 images, I can cover almost like a 240 degrees field of view for my panel. For my program with a 40 mil, this is same thing, overlap 40% at least. And with a 40 mil, I know that for the same perspective, in 7 images, I can get the same field of view. And now I'm going to show you a bit of my editing and how I can combine these panoramas and do everything. So taking these images for the sky, these images for the foreground, I'm going to get now into the editing part. And that's also one of the most critical parts because a lot of people shoot a lot in the field, but then they're either lazy or scared about editing their shots. And of course, same as with any deep sky imaging, with wide field, you also have to edit your images. It's critical, and the software that I use in this case, and I recommend, is Lightroom, Photoshop. PTV Pro works really well for panoramas, and Starry Landscape Stacker for stacking. Or like I said before, if you are a Windows user, you can use Sequator. You can use other software. I know that Affinity Pro is free and works well. On other raw editors like Capture One or Luminar. This is just the one I use, but keep in mind that you can apply other software for your editing. One of the first things I do when I'm editing is the basic adjustments in all the images. So I normally do all my exposure and color adjustments. And the main software for this is Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, Capture One, or whatever raw editor you use. This is an example of the foreground image, which has, like a slightly yellowish tint. And the only thing I do is doing the correction in the color and the exposure if it's necessary. Same for the sky. I'm shooting with an Astro modified camera. And even though I have like a custom gray card, custom white balance made with a gray card, the colors still have like a warmish tint in the sky. So what I do again is correcting the color. As you can see here on the right side, we have the image with the color correction. Then I export all the files as TIFF in order to stitch the panorama. And you can do this in Lightroom, Photoshop, but my recommendation is to have a dedicated panoramic software. The one I recommend is PTV Pro. I know it's not cheap, but it's one of the best panoramic softwares that you can use. It's fast, it's very reliable. You can assign control points. You can stitch very difficult panoramas. And also you can do masking. And the best thing is that you can do everything with many different projections. So in Lightroom, Photoshop, you normally have 3 different projections, whether it's spherical, rectangular, whatever. In PTV, you have more than 10 projections, like Mercator, like fisheye, transversal. There are many different projections, and that allows you to be more creative when you are doing your panoramas at night. So with PTV, I can get all my images from my foreground, all the images for the sky, as you can see here. And then I just stitch them together. This is the stitching in PTV, and this is basically the result when I'm stitching my foreground. This is the result when I'm stitching my sky. Then one of the next steps, what I do in the sky is doing a stop reduction in the sky, just to make sure I can get more of the detail in the sky of the nebula. Then I use to adjust the foreground. So obviously there are gaps, there are things that are a little bit like down. So you always need to adjust a little bit the foreground to make sure it's representing what you are seeing with your own eyes in reality. So I'm going to just correct my foreground, as you can see here in this image. Then is when we do the blending. As I was explaining before, we need to blend both images. It doesn't matter if it's a single shot or panoramas, you have to do this blending. And the only way to do blending is masking. You need to create this mask. Thankfully, with all the new tools that we have in Photoshop, masking is way easier. There are even things like sky replacement that can give you, or sky selection that can give you like this beautiful selection in the sky. Whenever you have something like this, like a snowy peaks with lower contrast, it's a bit more of a pain. You have to do it manually, but still, we have to create this masking. And once we have a mask, we do the blending of the sky and the foreground, as you can see here. Then we do a little bit of stretching to recover the contrast and a little bit of the color. Then I do some what I call presence adjustments, which is getting more detail and contrast in the Milky Way. Color adjustments, as you can see the difference. We basically try to bring out all the natural colors in the night sky. That can be the colors in the Milky Way core, the colors in the air glow, and different colors that we can see in the night sky. Then some vignetting adjustments, like some vignetting to lead the viewer's eye into the main elements of the image. Then some foreground adjustments. Don't forget about the foreground. We have to bring also details. And I sometimes apply some landscape photography editing techniques like dodge and burning, trying to bring shadows and lights, to the different areas. And then some final adjustments. That will be my final image. And that's roughly the process that I follow for this. Like I said, editing can take a long time for wide field astro. That would be like an entire class only on editing. But it's also one of the most exciting parts, like bringing to life all the images that you capture in the field. And especially when there are panoramas, I think it's really exciting to edit your images and to bring them to life. So yeah, this is the final shot. So you can see an example of all this process behind this wide field image. And yeah, now this is basically everything about all the process that I follow in my wide field Milky Way astrophotography. I'm going to show you now different resources that you can use, and then we'll leave some questions for the end. One of them is my Milky Way course. I created this course with everything about Milky Way and white field astro. So I cover everything from the basics to the more advanced and tracking. So there are 3 different modules, and I have like a package or bundle. You can have all the 3 courses discount. On top of that, I have like a special discount for my presentations. So any member of the club that want to enjoy a 60% discount, and I never offered this discount out of my presentations. You can enjoy it here with this QR code. Just scan it, you'll go directly to the card where you can have my full Milky Way course with 60% off. But I show everything with all the techniques. It's like more than 24 hours of tutorials. Also, as I was saying, I teach a lot in the field. We do different workshops. On the East Coast, we do a couple of workshops in New Hampshire and Acadia, which are fully for astro. And during the summertime, we do New Hampshire in July and Acadia in September. And then we have a lot of astro workshops in the Southwest. So we do Death Valley, Utah, Monument Valley, New Mexico, Big Bend National Park, and also international tours. We do international astro tours like La Palma in Spain, which is the best place in Europe for astro, Atacama in Bolivia, New Zealand, and other trips. If you want to find more, you can Google Capture the Atlas tours or just scan this code, and you can read more about the different workshops, different tours, where we basically shoot the night sky in some incredible locations. And finally, we create every year a free magazine for our community. This year, we just released the magazine like recently, a few days ago. This is completely free. So if you want to download it, you can just scan this QR code here. This year, we have a lot of astro articles. So we have articles about how to do H-alpha astrophotography. We have one about a total solar eclipse. We have one about composition for Milky Way, one about my capture night filter. So there are more than 5-6 articles about astro, and I highly recommend taking a look. Like I said, it's completely free. There are more than 100 pages, and I think it's a very nice read for the summer. So like I said, just you can scan this QR code, and you'll get that in your email with all the details, and I hope you enjoy the magazine this summer. Yeah. You can find my work on capturetheatlas.com, or if you have social media, YouTube, I have a small YouTube channel where I upload some videos. Facebook, Instagram, everywhere is Capture the Atlas. And I'm always happy to reply to your questions, help, whatever you need, just feel free to reach out. And yeah, I'll be happy to assist. And yeah, we can jump now into questions. I'm happy to reply to any of your questions that you have. And yeah. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Anybody have questions here? There you go. Dan, someone's asking, what software are you using for Whoop It Disappeared?
For star reduction, I think I read. Yeah, I think the question was, what software do I use for star reduction? I was using StarNet for a long time. It's a great piece of software, very fast and it's free. But more recently, in the last couple of years, I've been using Star Exterminator, which is an incredible piece of software integrated with Photoshop as a plugin. And also they have an action on the website, which many people don't know about, but there's an action, it's a free action that you can download on the website. And basically you can click and it does the star reduction in your image, and it gives you 2 different layers. It gives you one with the stars and one with just the sky with no stars. That means that you can directly edit your sky with no stars and do all your contrast, colors, stretching, and then you can put the stars back on just with one click. So that's a software I normally recommend to our students, Star Exterminator. I know it's paid and StarNet is free, but I think it's a great, great piece of software.
Dan, could you make a quick check on your more options? and see what your microphone is? It sounds like you've got the computer microphone instead of your ear pods.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let me see here.
Just more options, settings.
Oh, yeah. Give me 1 second. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me better?
Before we were just getting some garbling on the edges. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I don't know what happened with that with the phones. Yeah. Do you want me to read the questions, or are you going to read them, Paul?
I can read them if you want. Hang on here. Let me find it. It's up at the top. Okay. What software are you using for star reduction? That is a star exterminator?
That's the one the star exterminator is the one I use. Yeah.
Yeah. And then do you stack for panos, and how many images per panel?
Well, it depends. Depends on the situation. Sometimes I'm doing these huge 360 panoramas that are very big. To make things easier, both in the field and also in the editing, I don't stack. I maybe take, like, with my tracker, one image, and normally it's like 1 to 2 minutes per frame. But more recently, it's true that I've been stacking more. Sometimes sadly, there are more satellites and more garbage in the sky, and sometimes when you are stacking, you are kind of reducing the risk, or if there is something, flashing your lens or something like that. So in some situations, I'm stacking maybe shorter exposures, like 50 seconds, 40 seconds, and I stack maybe 2 or 3 of them. But in general, if it's like a large, big panorama, I don't usually stack. I prefer to take like 1 or 2 minutes per frame. But it depends again on the situation, how much time I have, and yeah, it depends.
Okay. Then the next question is, for stacking, do you do both vertical and horizontal captures for pano?
Normally for panos, I shoot everything vertical. I shoot all, like I was showing in my slides, all the vertical orientation. That's the way I shoot all my panoramas, both for the foreground and for the sky. I always shoot in vertical orientation.
Okay. Then Christy has an observation. Star Exterminator also has star shrink option in Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's not the same. Star Shrink is another plugin from the same company, RC Astro. And when you use a Star Shrink, it just do that, shrinks the star a little bit. What you can control how much you want to shrink the stars, but it's different from the star removal that a Star Exterminator is doing. So I have both pieces of software. I normally use a Star Exterminator to remove the stars, edit my sky, and then put the stars back on. And then at the end of the editing, if I want to fine tune my editing a little bit, I use a Star Shrink, maybe a tiny bit, just to leave the final touch and leave the stars the way I like it.
Okay. And then Kim's asking, you talked about using 2 cameras for panos. Why don't you use the same focal length lens for each camera?
Yeah, that's a good question. The main reason is because the camera has different megapixels. The Astro modified Sony A7 III that I'm using is 23 megapixels, and the Sony A1 that I'm using is 51 megapixels. So I was running tests, and roughly it's exactly almost the same. If I shoot at 20 mil with my Sony A7 III, which is 23 megapixels, it's almost exactly the same as a 14 mil in my Sony A1, which is 51 megapixels. So that's the example I was showing before in this panorama from New Zealand. I use these 2 lenses, and I know that they match almost perfectly. It's maybe like a tiny adjustment you have to do. But of course, you need to do this, you need to know your lenses and your cameras. Another option is to use the same lens and same cameras. I know some people doing dual setups. They have the same cameras, same resolution, and then they use the same focal length. That's another way to do it. I personally like this Sony A1, which is a stock camera. It's not modified for my foregrounds. The camera works really well, capturing in low light, and the colors are incredible. So I prefer to have these separate cameras for the sky and for the foreground. And sometimes, in some situations, I use a dual setup. If I'm hiking in the mountains or taking a long trek, or I just want to be, make things easier, I just take my normal Astro modified camera, and I do everything with one camera and one lens.
Okay. Christy's asking, how accurate is the polar alignment with the Benro Polaris when you don't have line of sight of Polaris?
Well, for wide field astro, in my experience, is very accurate. I can track up to 4 or 5 minutes with no issues. Of course, there are some things you have to consider, like any tracker, like leveling your tracker and all that. But for wide field astro, it's very reliable. However, for deep skies, not as much. I know I've been trying to use it for deep sky with 200 mil, 400 mil, and the margin of error is too high. I know there's a guy that was designing like a special software called Alpaca for doing deep sky with the Benro. But still, my recommendation is that if you are doing wide field astro, the Benro Polaris is great. But if you are into deep sky, I would recommend a different tracker for sure.
Okay,
Mostly, yeah.
And then for our last question, before we adjourn, any tips, links for automation you mentioned with the Benro?
Tips. I mean, the best tips with the Benro is to practice because the learning curve with that tracker is a little bit challenging, especially because Benro doesn't provide any instruction. And I actually created like a Benro Polaris course because there was no instruction by anyone. So in my experience with the Benro is to practice as much as you can. Make sure you go into the field. And even before going to the field at home, you can practice your panoramas, like start here, finish there, do this stacking, do this interval, and make sure you practice as much as you can with the Benro. It takes some time and patience, but trust me, it's a great tracker. And when you get the hang of it, it's a great tool to use.
Yeah, great. Where are you going to watch the eclipse in Spain? Or
we're going to Burgos. It's in kind of like in northern Spain in the Meseta. So it's an area, northern Spain has like a higher risk of clouds in the coastline, but we're kind of like in the interior where it's warmer, but there's more chance of clear skies. Of course, you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, we pick the best locations in terms of like statistics for eclipse watching. Yeah.
Sure. Well, if you think you could ever stomach a Bortle 4 or 5 sky, we would love to have you visit us.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah. No, I used to live out of Philadelphia, and I know it's a struggle sometimes to find dark skies, but I mean, you can still get nice images, practice, and see the stars, which is the most important thing.
Okay.
And I'll send you, Paul, the calendar for Sky Meadows in case someone wants to use it.
Sure, we can distribute that to them. We thank you very much for that. Thank you so much for presenting this evening. It's been very insightful, and we wish you the best and clear skies for your solar eclipse. And our members hope to see you maybe individually, taking Milky Way pictures. This has been a great presentation, and we thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to all the club. It was a pleasure to speak today with you. And I wish everybody clear skies this summer. I hope you can capture nice, beautiful white field Milky Way images. The meteor shower with the Perseids, which is in a few weeks. And yeah, just enjoy a nice summer under the stars.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again. And we have a good remainder of the day. Get some sleep now.
Yeah, I will. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for staying up late. Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.